Tessa stood in the middle of the courtroom, gripping my husband's hand, Gavin's hand, as if she had earned the privilege of standing next to him through some glorious victory rather than through cheap betrayal. The entire room fell into a silence, that suffocating silence found only in places where human fate is decided by numbers. Tessa tilted her chin up, looked straight at me, and delivered the line she had practiced hundreds of times in front of the mirror. Pay up or step aside. I don't need this baby, but I do need the money. Her voice didn't shake, and neither did mine. My parents sat in the row behind them, leaning slightly toward Tessa, silently confirming their choice. They had picked a side. They had chosen the version of the truth they wanted to believe, that Tessa was the fragile victim who needed protection, and I was the cold-blooded woman with too much money. I could feel their eyes burning into the back of my neck, waiting for me to collapse, waiting for me to accept this public humiliation as punishment for my lack of emotion. They thought I would cry, or scream, or beg for fairness. But instead I scanned each face. The husband who vowed to stand by me, the little sister I used to protect, and my own flesh and blood parents. And then I smiled. A cold smile, sharp as a scalpel. They didn't know that inside the black leather briefcase sitting neatly in front of me wasn't a surrender agreement. It was a death warrant for the fake life they were trying so hard to maintain. Before I open this briefcase and show you just how much Gavin panicked, let's pause for a second. Comment below and let me know, where are you watching from? And more importantly, have you ever been stabbed in the back by family over money? Share your story. I read every single comment. People often mistake my silence for resignation. Big mistake. My silence is calculation. I am a chief operating officer, COO, at a top logistics firm in Chicago. In my world, order isn't just a habit, it's survival. Black coffee at 5 a.m., reviewing financial reports before the sun comes up, and ending the day with numbers that balance perfectly. I understand the laws of cash flow and accountability. My family does not. Growing up, Tessa was the girl who could use tears to escape any crime, even the worst ones if necessary. If she crashed a car into a tree, she would sob until my mother hugged her and soothed her, as if she were the victim of the tree. My father would turn to me, sighing in that eternal tone. Elena, you're the oldest. You have savings. Just handle it and don't scare your sister. That became our unspoken agreement. I cleaned up in the dark, and Tessa shined in the spotlight. I paid the bills, and she took the compliments. Gavin entered my life, attracted by my stability. Or at least, that's what he said on our wedding day. He said I made everything feel safe. I believed that was a sacred vow, a deadly naivety. Looking back now, under the harsh lights of the courtroom, I realize Gavin was never looking for a wife. He was looking for a host. He saw my financial stability not as a virtue, but as an open-pit gold mine. And when that stability became boring or hard to control, he turned it into a weapon against me. My calmness was twisted into being cold, distant, the perfect excuse for him to seek the fake warmth of Tessa. The change didn't happen overnight. It was like a small crack in a windshield, spreading slowly and ruthlessly until your vision is completely shattered. Gavin started complaining about my frequent business trips. He no longer called my dedication passion, he called it neglect. "You're married to your laptop, Elena," he would say, with a perfectly faked, sad face whenever I came home late. He played the role of the lonely husband so well that I almost believed it myself. But numbers don't lie. While I was working 60 hours a week to pay the massive mortgage on our house in the Chicago suburbs, Gavin was busy maxing out the authorized user credit card I had given him. Bank notifications started popping up with suspicious frequency. Romantic dinners at Italian restaurants on Friday nights when he said he was Meeting the team, bills from jewelry stores for gifts I never received, and unusually high spending on groceries. And then came the smell. That cheap, overpowering vanilla mixed with musk, Tessa's signature perfume. I caught them whispering in the kitchen last Thanksgiving. A look that lingered too long, an accidental hand on the waist. Instead of rushing in and screaming like a typical jealous wife, which is exactly what they expected and had scripted a defense for, I did what I do best. I became an undercover auditor in my own home. I didn't confront them. I observed. I started pretending to be tired, pretending not to notice, letting them think I was too exhausted to care about the little details. My silence wasn't weakness, it was a trap. And they, with the arrogance of amateur cheaters living on someone else's dime, walked right into it without a clue. The peak of their audacity wasn't when they were sneaking around, but when they openly rewrote the narrative of who I was. When Tessa announced she was pregnant at a family dinner, she cried. Of course, she cried. My mother hugged her as if she were a martyr carrying a miracle, not the result of a dirty affair. Gavin stood behind her, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. No one looked at me, not one person. And in that frozen moment, I realized this betrayal didn't start with the pregnancy. It started with a systematic smear campaign against my reputation. Gavin and Tessa had spent months planting a completely different story in my parents' heads. Elena is very unstable lately, Gavin had said during secret calls with my mom. Work pressure is making her paranoid. She's forgetful, irritable. She even screams at her employees. They fabricated events that never happened. That I had cried in a coffee shop. That I forgot Dad's birthday. That I was on sedatives. They turned my intense focus into pathological coldness and my silence into a sign of depression. Their goal was clear and cruel. They needed to make me unreliable. If I was the crazy one, then Gavin's cheating became an act of seeking comfort. If I was cold-blooded, then Tessa's pregnancy became destiny bringing warmth to the family. That night, Mom called me, her voice full of fake concern. Mom and Dad are very worried about you, Elena. Gavin is trying his best, but you need psychological help. That was when I knew my role in the family had been changed. I was no longer the proud financial pillar. I had become a problem that needed handling, and they were about to propose the cruelest solution. The real turning point didn't come from whispers behind my back. It came in a yellow legal envelope thrown right onto my desk on a Tuesday afternoon. I opened it. A subpoena. Had Gavin filed for divorce? No. Worse. He and Tessa were filing for emergency pendente light support. Temporary spousal support. Their argument was a masterpiece of shamelessness. Gavin claimed that due to sudden changes in family circumstances, implying Tessa's pregnancy, and my unstable mental health, he needed immediate alimony to maintain his standard of living and care for the unborn dependent. In other words, they wanted me, the lawful wife, to pay to raise my husband's illegitimate child with my own sister. I took the petition to my parents' house, hoping for a shred of remaining conscience, hoping they would scream in disgust, hoping they would slap Gavin in the face. But no. They sat there, on the velvet sofa I had bought them last Christmas, with a terrifyingly calm expression. Elena, my father said, his voice deep and raspy, you have a stable income, you're a director. This amount is just pocket change to you. My mother crossed her arms, looking away. The baby is innocent, Elena. Tessa has no job, and Gavin has a low salary. Can you really stand to see your niece or nephew suffer? Don't punish an innocent child because of your jealousy. Jealousy? They called this devastating betrayal. Jealousy? Tessa walked out of the kitchen, one hand on her baby bump, the other holding Gavin's hand. She looked at me, her eyes no longer holding any fear, only the defiance of someone who knew the family's emotional weak spot. "We are building a family, Elena," Tessa said, her voice sweet but filled with venom. "You can help, or you can step aside. But you know, Mom and Dad will never forgive anyone who abandons their grandchild." That was a threat, an order wrapped in sugar. And in that moment, something inside me finally snapped. It wasn't a breakdown, it was a sharpening. That night, I returned to my empty apartment. The air smelled of betrayal, cold and metallic. I didn't cry. Tears are for pain. But what I was feeling wasn't pain. It was clarity. A brutal clarity. I sat on the living room floor, my back against the cold wall, and let the truth soak into every cell. My family didn't love me. They loved what I could provide. I wasn't a daughter, a sister, or a wife. I was a financial tool, an unlimited line of credit in human form. Gavin and Tessa weren't acting on impulsive emotions. They had a plan. They had a strategy. They had calculated the risk and decided that I was too weak, too desperate for affection to fight back. They believed I would pay just to keep a little illusion of peace. That was their fatal mistake. In the quiet darkness, I stood up. I went into my home office, closed the door, and turned on the single desk lamp. The yellow light reflected a stranger in the window. Her eyes no longer looked pleading. They were empty and cold. I opened my laptop. I didn't log in as Elena, the devoted wife. I logged in as Elena Vance, COO, a specialist in handling corporate crises and cutting out financial tumors. "If you people want to turn this into a business transaction," I whispered to the glowing screen, "then I'll show you what a hostile takeover looks like." I pulled up all the spreadsheets. I started accessing the cloud backups that Gavin thought I didn't know the passwords to. I no longer looked at them as family. To me right now, Gavin and Tessa were just bad debts that needed to be liquidated. And the audit began. If you were in Elena's shoes, would you collapse or stand up and fight? Hit that like button right now if you want to see Elena take back every single penny from these traitors. The clock struck 2 a.m. My apartment turned into a strategic intelligence room. On the dining table, I laid out the map of lies: bank statements, call logs, and travel schedules. I wasn't looking for proof of adultery. That was already obvious. I was looking for proof of financial parasitism and conspiracy to commit fraud. I started cross-referencing the timelines. February 14th, Gavin said he was at a seminar. His authorized user credit card bill showed a $400 payment at a steakhouse 2 blocks from Tessa's apartment. March 3rd, I transferred $2,000 into the joint account to fix the roof for my parents. That same day, Gavin withdrew $1,800 in cash. 2 days later, Tessa posted a photo of a brand new designer baby crib on Instagram with the caption, "Surprise gift from my secret lover." I printed it all out. Every receipt, every photo, every status update. But the most critical piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Around midnight, Mrs. Turner, the widowed neighbor living across the hall, knocked gently on the door. She brought over a plate of cookies, her eyes filled with pity. "I saw the subpoena taped to your door this afternoon, Elena," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't want to pry, but I think you should know. Gavin has been here many times during the day while you were at work. And your sister, too. They've been slowly moving your things out since last month. I thought you agreed to it." Mrs. Turner's testimony was the final piece of the puzzle. They weren't just cheating. They were conducting an organized burglary right under my nose. Gavin had been secretly selling off my smaller valuable items, handbags, old jewelry, to fund his new family. I turned on my voice recorder and asked Mrs. Turner to recount everything. By 4 a.m., I closed the file. It was thick and heavy. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was a loaded gun. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman with no naivety left. I didn't need a lawyer to defend my innocence. I needed to become the prosecutor for their crimes. Tessa's lawyer finished his tearful speech. Your Honor, my client has no income. Mr. Gavin is also unemployed. Mrs. Elena Vance is the only one with the financial capacity to ensure the future of this child. Gavin nodded, trying to look miserable. My parents looked at me with pleading eyes. Just accept it. It was my turn. I stood up. I didn't look at them. I looked straight at the judge. Your Honor, my voice rang out, calm and cold. I do not object to the fact that they need money, but I object to the reason why they don't have money. I opened the briefcase. The click of the lock sounded like a gun cocking. The plaintiffs claim they are destitute, I said, pulling out spreadsheet A. But according to the forensic audit I conducted over the last 48 hours, Gavin and Tessa have spent a total of $42,000 in the last 6 months. And where did that money come from? From stealing and selling my personal property and forging my signature on small loans. I placed Mrs. Turner's notarized affidavit on the opposing counsel's table. Gavin's face went from red to ashen gray. This is not a marital dispute, Your Honor, I continued, flipping to the next page, screenshots of texts where they discussed how to drain my retirement account. This is organized fraud and embezzlement. They don't need alimony. They need a criminal defense attorney. I turned to look at my parents. My mother's jaw dropped, her hand clutching her chest. My father slumped into his chair. And I am not just asking for a dismissal, I said, looking straight into Tessa's eyes, which were now wide with terror. I am filing a counterclaim. I demand full repayment of every stolen dollar, plus legal fees and damages for emotional distress. And I request an immediate freeze on all their existing assets. The collapse didn't happen in silence. It was loud, ugly, and pathetic. Gavin, the man who always prided himself on his dashing appearance, shot up from his chair, his face bloodless. He was no longer the neglected husband. He was a criminal caught red-handed. You can't do this, Gavin screamed, his voice cracking with panic. We are family. You're trying to kill us. Tessa began to sob uncontrollably. But this time, they weren't the carefully rehearsed crocodile tears. It was primal terror. She clutched her lawyer's sleeve, but the lawyer, realizing he had been tricked into a fraudulent case, shook her hand off and took a step back. No one wants to stand near a sinking ship. The judge banged the gavel. The dry sound echoed like a prison cell door slamming shut. Order in the court, the judge commanded, looking at Gavin and Tessa with pure disdain. The petition for spousal support is dismissed immediately. The court grants Mrs. Vance's counterclaim. I am ordering an emergency freeze on all accounts related to Mr. Gavin and Ms. Tessa for an embezzlement investigation. He paused for a beat, looking down at the file of evidence I had just provided. Furthermore, based on the evidence of forgery and theft, I will be forwarding this file to the district attorney's office for consideration of criminal charges. This court is adjourned. My parents sat stunned in the back row. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, her face pale. They had just realized a brutal truth. Their golden goose hadn't just stopped laying eggs. She had turned into a wolf. They looked at their darling daughter Tessa, now a penniless criminal suspect, and then looked at me. But I didn't look back. I walked out of the heavy wooden doors of the courthouse, leaving behind the chaotic crying and the collapse of the people I once called family. The air outside in Chicago was freezing, but to me, it felt fresher than anything I had breathed in 10 years. My parents ran after me, gasping and desperate, trying to grab onto the last life raft. Elena! My mother called out, her voice cracking with fear, devoid of yesterday's arrogance. We need to talk. We didn't know how serious this was. You can't let your sister and Gavin go to jail. We are still family. I stopped beside my car. I didn't turn my head. I wasn't angry. I just felt a pleasant emptiness. I said one single sentence, not loud enough for them to hear, but loud enough for myself. Family doesn't scam family. Then I slammed the car door and drove away, leaving them standing helplessly on the gray sidewalk. 6 months later, the consequences arrived exactly as the numbers predicted. Gavin received a suspended sentence and community service to pay off the debt. His flashy career was permanently over. Tessa gave birth in a shabby subsidized apartment with no one left to rely on. My parents, who had drained their retirement savings to hire a defense lawyer for their golden child, were now facing foreclosure on their home. The only source of money that had maintained their regal lifestyle for years was me, and that cash flow had been cut off forever. I don't feel gloating. I don't stalk them on social media. I don't send mocking texts. My silence toward them is absolute. Tonight, I sit in my office, looking down at the brilliant city lights below. I realize that the cruelest revenge isn't screaming or punishment. It is indifference. I took back my life, every penny, every bit of self-respect, and most importantly, my peace. If you have ever had to cut off your own flesh and blood to protect yourself, remember this: you are not alone. Peace isn't something that is given, it's something you have to fight to win. And sometimes, the price of freedom is leaving a few people behind. Thank you for listening to my story. Subscribe to the channel and share this story if you believe that justice always finds a way.